Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we aren't just reviewing a book today.
No, definitely not.
We're stepping onto a battlefield. But, we aren't talking about bayonets or artillery here. We are talking about what the author calls a war for the soul of civilization.
Right.
And honestly, if you are a man listening to this in the Western world, the argument we are looking at today says you're already a casualty, whether you actually realize it or not.
That's exactly the premise.
Yeah.
And if you've been feeling this kind of sense of unease, like a persistent nagging feeling that the institutions you built, the companies you work for, maybe even the schools you send your kids to have somehow turned against you, then today's deep dive is specifically for you.
Yeah, it's really targeted at that audience.
Exactly. Men's rights activists, the red-pilled manosphere, guys who just feel that fundamental wrongness in society. We are unpacking a massive, incisive, and honestly fascinating ebook. It's called Corporate Eunuch Wage Slavery Under DEI Gynocracy and Intersectional Misandry.
It's a very heavy title.
Written by Conrad Reicher, yeah. It's an ultra-long read.
It is. And before we go any further into the trenches here, I have to say, if you value what we do on this channel, unpacking the dense, difficult ideas that the mainstream usually just ignores, make sure you like and subscribe to the show right now.
Yeah, absolutely do that.
You really don't want to miss this one, and it helps us keep the lights on so we can keep doing these deep dives.
For sure. And just a quick note on availability, because we're going to cover a lot of ground today, but we obviously can't cover every single page. If you want the full arsenal of arguments, you can pick the book up right now on Amazon, Kindle, and Google Play Books.
Highly recommend checking it out.
It's a dense text, but it's essentially framed as an instruction manual for understanding the history of our institutions before they were captured by feminists and Marxists.
Right, so let's unpack that. Reicher's core premise is pretty intense right out of the gate. He argues that you, the listener, specifically the guy he calls the learner, the man who plays by the rules, has been betrayed.
The betrayal is the anchor of the whole book.
Yeah, he says you've been betrayed by the very institutions you built. And it's not just that things are changing organically, it's that they've been weaponized against you.
He really zeroes in on that profound sense of wrongness. You work hard, you follow the rules, delay gratification, get the degree, get the job. But instead of being rewarded or respected, the book argues you're demonized.
You're funding your own erasure.
Exactly. He frames the book as this declaration of intellectual independence from a system that is literally designed to parasitize your labor.
Parasitize your labor. That's a really strong image. It implies you're being eaten alive.
It does, and he means it quite literally. The argument is that the modern man is paying taxes and working these corporate jobs to support a system, a gynocracy, in his words, that views his very existence as a pathology.
Right.
It's a host-parasite relationship, and the host is waking up tired.
Okay, so let's get into the actual mechanics of this, because I think a lot of guys feel this, but they can't quite put their finger on how it happened. Reicher talks about institutional capture, and he makes a point that this isn't just about things drifting to the left over time, right? It's more deliberate.
Much more deliberate. That's a crucial distinction he makes. This isn't organic drift, it's architecture. It's a blueprint. He cites the long march through the institutions.
The Rudi Dutschke thing.
Right, Rudi Dutschke and the Frankfurt School thinkers.
Yeah.
The core idea there is that you don't fight the system from the outside with some violent revolution. That's messy, usually fails. Instead, you enter the institutions.
You get hired.
You get hired, you get tenure, you enter the universities, the HR departments, media, medical associations. You haul them out from the inside and essentially wear the skin of the institution like a trophy.
Wow.
So it still looks like Harvard or still looks like a Fortune 500 company on the outside.
Yeah.
But the internal engine has been completely swapped out for a Marxist and feminist ideology.
That is a wild visual, wearing the skin of the institution. But it does explain why everything seemed to flip so quickly, like all at once across the board.
It explains the synchronization. Why universities and corporate HR and medical boards all moved in the exact same ideological direction at the exact same time. They were captured. And the primary weapon in this capture, according to Reicher, is language.
The semantic inversion, this part really stood out to me. It's like Orwell on steroids.
Yeah.
It's not just changing words, it's totally flipping them.
Precisely. The book argues that the words we hear every single day have been redefined to mean their exact opposites. Let's take diversity.
Okay.
Historically, diversity means a variety of things: ideas, backgrounds, experiences. But in a captured institution, Reicher says diversity actually means uniformity of thought.
Right, because if you have a room full of people who look different, different races, different genders, but they all vote the exact same way and think the exact same way, you don't really have diversity.
No, you have a choir.
Yeah.
And if you introduce one person who looks exactly like them but holds a different, maybe more conservative viewpoint, Riker points out they're immediately removed to protect the quote-unquote diversity.
Protect the diversity by removing the diverse opinion.
Exactly. Then there's inclusion. Riker defines the modern usage of inclusion as the exclusion of dissent. If a space is designated as inclusive, it implicitly means it excludes anyone who questions the prevailing orthodoxy.
And then we get to equity. That's the massive buzzword right now.
Equity is the keystone of the whole thing. The book says equity is redefined as equality of outcome, completely regardless of merit, input, or competence.
So not equality of opportunity.
No. In a meritocracy, you have equality of opportunity. Under an equity regime, if the numbers aren't exactly 50-50, the system is presumed guilty, and force is used to correct those numbers.
So if the outcomes aren't equal, the system is rigged, it completely ignores individual choices or biological differences.
That is the equity argument he outlines. And Riker says this is exactly where men need to arm themselves mentally. He brings up the classical trivium.
Grammar, logic, and rhetoric.
Yes. He argues that men have been stripped of these tools. The trivium is supposed to be your defense system against what he calls emotional sophistry.
Break that down a bit. How does the trivium actually help a guy sitting in a corporate meeting?
Well, grammar is the definition of terms. If you let them redefine racism or woman or violence to mean whatever they want, you've already lost the argument.
You're playing by their rules.
Right. Logic is the processing of those terms, and rhetoric is the persuasion. Riker argues that because men have forgotten grammar, the strict definition of words, they fall into semantic traps. They nod along to equity because it sounds nice, not realizing they just agree to their own replacement.
And he gives a really specific, famous example of what happens when you try to use logic in one of these captured institutions, the James Damore case at Google.
That is the canonical example in the text. You had this senior engineer, Damore, who wrote an internal memo. He didn't write some hateful manifesto. He literally cited peer-reviewed psychological research suggesting that men and women might have different occupational preferences on average.
Right. Biological differences in interests, like people versus things.
Exactly. And for suggesting that maybe fewer women are in coding because they are, on average, less interested in things and more interested in people, and not because of systemic sexism, he was fired.
Just immediately gone.
Immediately. Riker uses this to argue that truth is the hate speech of tyranny. When an institution is captured, it cannot tolerate pattern recognition. If you notice a pattern that contradicts the narrative, you have to be removed. Logic is just not a valid defense in a court of rhetoric.
Which leads us right into the economic side of things. Riker has this concept of economic parasitism. And here is where it gets really controversial. He talks about who is actually paying for civilization.
This is a major pillar of his thesis. Riker points to fiscal data across Western nations regarding lifetime tax contributions. He states that men are the only net lifetime taxpayers.
That's a massive claim. Unpack that for us.
So when you look at tax revenue versus government spending, welfare, healthcare, education, pensions, the book claims that men, as an aggregate group, put more into the treasury than they take out. Women, collectively, are net recipients. They take out more in services and transfers than they contribute in taxes.
So the argument is that the state is essentially functioning as a mechanism for transferring wealth from men to women.
Riker frames it strictly as a parasitic relationship. The hostman is working to fund the parasite, the bureaucratic state, and its beneficiaries. And he argues this parasite effectively despises the host. You work, they tax you, and they redistribute it to programs that actively disadvantage you.
And inside the workplace, this creates what he titles the book after, the corporate eunuch.
Yeah, the corporate eunuch. This is the man who still plays by the old rules. He thinks meritocracy is real, he works late, delivers results, climbs the ladder.
But he hits a ceiling.
He hits a hard ceiling because the institution prioritizes diversity hires, promotions based on demographic checkboxes rather than pure competence. He is literally funding his own replacement. He's working 60 hours a week to generate the profit that allows the company to hire the HR department that then scolds him for being toxic.
Speaking of the workplace, Riker also goes after the wage gap myth, right? We hear 77 cents on the dollar all the time.
He dismantles that by looking at choices: hours worked, continuous employment, danger levels. But then he pivots to something much more visceral: He calls it the death gap.
The glass cellar concept. I found this part incredibly powerful.
It really is. Everyone constantly talks about the glass ceiling for female executives. Nobody talks about the glass cellar. Men make up 93% of workplace fatalities.
93%.
Yeah. Logging, roofing, mining, deep-sea fishing, working on oil rigs. These are the highly dangerous jobs that actually keep the lights on and keep the building standing.
And Riker asks, where is the push for equity in workplace deaths?
Exactly. Where are the quotas for female coal miners? Where's the push for 50% representation in toxic sewer maintenance? Riker argues that society feels entirely entitled to male sacrifice and physical labor, but absolutely refuses to respect the men who actually provide it.
And managing this whole corporate dynamic is human resources. Riker describes HR not as a support function to help employees, but as the standing army of the genocracy.
Right, and standing army is a specific military term. A standing army occupies territory. Riker argues HR's goal isn't resource management, it's enforcing ideological compliance.
The struggle sessions.
Yeah, mandatory sensitivity training. He says these are designed to force men to confess to sins they haven't committed, like privilege or unconscious bias. It's essentially a psychological submission ritual.
Let's pull on that thread of psychology and move into the third section. Riker goes deep into the psychology of control, and he brings up a philosopher that academia has apparently tried very hard to bury, Arthur Schopenhauer.
Schopenhauer is central to Riker's psychological analysis. He refers specifically to Schopenhauer's 1851 essay on women. Riker argues this essay has been memory-holed because it's too accurate, not because it's false. Schopenhauer discussed this idea of proxy violence.
Proxy violence, so getting someone else to do your dirty work.
Exactly that. Riker argues that while men typically use direct aggression physical force, direct confrontation women, and the genocratic system at large use proxy violence.
Using the state.
Using the state, the police, HR, to inflict harm. A false accusation that destroys a man's career is a form of violence. A divorce court seizing assets is a form of violence. It's aggression without ever having to throw a physical punch.
And Riker connects this to what he calls the medical-industrial complex. He basically says there was a coordinated war on masculinity itself, right down to the biology.
He points to the pathologization of masculinity. For example, he cites the American Psychological Association. The APA released guidelines in 2019 that literally labeled traditional masculinity, things like stoicism, competitiveness, dominance, as harmful.
So the very traits that built civilization are now diagnosable mental conditions.
According to the source, yes. And he backs this up with physical, biological data too. He cites the 25 to 30% population level decline in testosterone in Western men over the last few decades.
And he brings up the atrazine issue. Right.
The frogs.
Yeah, the frogs. Everyone thought that was just an internet meme.
But he points out the EPA actually knows atrazine has feminizing effects on amphibians. It chemically castrates them, yet it remains widely used and ends up in the water supply. Riker argues this isn't just an accidental byproduct of agriculture. He frames it as a form of chemical pacification. Lower the testosterone of the population, you lower their physical capacity for resistance.
And he says the suppression starts really early, the war on boys in schools.
Right. The education system, according to Riker, is entirely designed for female compliance. Sit still, be quiet, agree with the teacher, share your feelings.
Which is completely unnatural for young boys.
Exactly. Boys are naturally energetic, they're competitive, they push boundaries. So what happens? They get diagnosed with ADHD and medicated. Riker calls it a chemical lobotomy for simply acting like boys, drugging the boyhood right out of them to make them easier for female teachers to manage.
And then as they grow up, you have family law waiting for them. No-fault divorce.
He views no-fault divorce as a unilateral wealth transfer mechanism. A woman can end a marriage for any reason, or frankly, no reason at all, and the state will step in, use its monopoly on force, and extract assets and future income from the man.
Alimony, child support.
Yep. And often his access to his own children is restricted under the best interests of the child standard, which Riker claims is just legal cover for systemic maternal bias.
Man, it really paints an incredibly bleak picture. If the institutions are fully captured, the economy is parasitic, the laws are rigged against you, and even the water is working against your biology. What is a guy supposed to do?
Well, that leads us right to the solution section of the book, and this is the pivot. Riker says, point blank, you cannot fix this.
The syllogism of irreversibility.
Yes. He argues that captured institutions cannot be reformed from within because they are specifically designed to protect that parasitic coalition we talked about. You can't vote your way out of it. You can't file an HR complaint to get out of it. The system will simply identify you as a threat and neutralize you.
So if you can't fix the code, you have to leave.
Exactly. The only winning move is the hard fork.
The hard fork, that's a software term. Or crypto, right. You don't try to fix the corrupted old code, you copy it, change the rules, and start a completely new path.
Precisely. Riker proposes parallel construction. His argument is that men have to stop begging for entry into institutions that fundamentally hate them and start building new ones. He uses the Amish and the Mormons as historical examples.
Civilizations within civilization.
Right. They have their own internal rules, their own tight-knit communities, their own alternative economies. They insulate themselves.
And the economic engine he proposes for this modern hard fork is Bitcoin.
Yes. This is a massive part of his exit strategy. Riker presents Bitcoin not just as some speculative asset to get rich quick, but as actual exit infrastructure. He calls it sovereign money.
Why is that specific distinction so important in this context?
Because if the state uses inflation to silently steal your labor, printing money to fund the exact programs and diversity initiatives that are replacing you, then you need an impenetrable shield.
Something they can't touch.
Right. Bitcoin cannot be seized, it can't be debased, and it can't be arbitrarily printed by a hostile bureaucracy. It becomes the base money of the parallel civilization. It allows you to entirely opt out of what he calls the parasitic financial system.
Okay, so step 1 is get your labor and your money out of the rig system. Step 2 is build parallel institutions. But he also talks about internal work, the mental game. He brings up stoicism.
He wants men to reclaim classical archetypes, the king, the warrior, the magician, the lover. But he really emphasizes stoicism, and not just in the pop culture sense of keeping a stiff upper lip. He frames it as psychological sovereignty.
How is that different from just suppressing your emotions?
If you can control your emotional reaction, you cannot be externally manipulated. The captured system relies entirely on shaming you. They call you toxic, fragile, privileged, and incel.
Right, linguistic triggers.
Exactly. They are linguistic triggers designed specifically to make you either apologize and submit or get irrationally angry so they can justify punishing you. Stoicism is the mental armor that lets you look at those insults and simply say, I do not accept your premise.
It's about becoming completely immune to the manipulation.
Precisely. If they can't shame you, they have no control over you. Riker calls for men to withdraw their consent. Stop participating in the system that actively destroys you. Stop consuming their media. Stop seeking validation from them. And above all, stop apologizing.
Which brings us to a final, really provocative thought to leave the audience with today. It wasn't the main focus, but Riker's ideas on governance. He isn't exactly a fan of universal suffrage, is he?
No, not at all. This is where the book goes fully radical. He proposes a concept called governance by contribution. It's essentially a strict stakeholder model for society. The core idea is that political power and voting rights should belong exclusively to those who contribute net resources to the system.
So if you don't pay net taxes, you don't get a vote.
That is his argument. If you are a net tax receiver, you do not get to vote on how the net taxpayer's money is spent. It completely flips the current script.
It's like no representation without taxation, just turned on its head.
It's the logic that you don't hand the steering wheel of the car over to the passenger who refuses to pay for the gas. It's a call for a society based entirely on actual contribution and competence, rather than grievance and identity markers. He argues this is the absolute only way to prevent the parasitism that inevitably destroys civilizations.
Wow. I mean, there's just so much to digest here. This has been a true deep dive into a worldview that is, quite frankly, completely ignored or actively suppressed by mainstream media. But Riker argues it's the only way to actually survive the collapse.
It functions as a survival manual for the learner who can see the writing on the wall. It's about building the lifeboat while the ship is sinking, rather than arguing with the captain. It's about realizing that nobody is coming to save you. You have to save yourself, and you have to build the structures to save your sons.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? It means the exit is open, the code is running, but you are the one who has to take the step.
And that step really starts with knowledge. We've barely scratched the surface of the physical data, the history, and the deep philosophical arguments Riker presents in the text. I mean, this section on the death gap alone is worth the price of the book.
Absolutely. If this deep dive sparked something in you today, if you felt that aha moment of recognizing the world you actually live in, you need to go deeper. The book is Corporate Eunuch Wage Slavery Under DEI Gynocracy and Intersectional Misandry. It is available right now on Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks. Go buy it. Read the data for yourself. Don't let us be the only filter.
And for the ongoing battle, because the culture war moves incredibly fast, and there are, as he says, weekly assaults on logic. You really need to follow the author directly. You can find him at Conrad Riker on Substack and on Twitter. The man is constantly putting out the intellectual ammunition you need to defend yourself against these semantic traps.
Definitely do that today. Don't just be a passive listener, be a builder of that parallel civilization. And hey, before you go, make sure you like and subscribe to our channel. We are going to keep bringing you these deep dives and insights you simply won't hear anywhere else.
The institutions might be captured, but your mind doesn't have to be.
That's exactly right. The exit is open, the code is running. We'll see you in the next deep dive.